So, we need somebody who knows the Labour Party back to front, who understands defence and has a strong sense of the history of our relations with Israel. And I am glad to say there is such a person, Lord George Robertson, the former Defence Secretary, who sat in so many Cobra meetings in his time and who conducted the recent Strategic Defence Review. I first wanted to hear his thoughts on the divisions being revealed in Trump's MAGA support base about whether or not to attack Iran.
Huge divisions in America, where you've got the extreme right of the Republican Party joining with the extreme left of the Democrat Party, and all of them saying we're not going to get into another war. And that is what Donald Trump's instinct would be telling him, because the moment you tip your toe into that water, then the piranha fish grab hold of it. And I think he knows that, and he's well aware of that, and he's made lots of noises about not getting involved in some war. But maybe if you want to get a deal, if you want to get the mullahs in Tehran to give up their nuclear ambition, and that must be what he's trying to get at the moment, then you've got to get as close to making a real threat as you possibly can. But so there's a high-stakes game of international poker going on at the moment, and nobody knows where it's going to end.
That's very interesting. And going close to the edge seems to be what Donald Trump is doing this afternoon in his language about blowing up the nuclear stuff and the rest of it. He is pushing it right to the edge. And the question is whether the Iranians understand what's going on or whether they simply take the huff.
Well, it depends on what they want. The Iranians don't want to be attacked by America. They don't want America back into the Gulf generally. They certainly don't want America backing Israel, because that then becomes pretty existential for them. So they've got a canny game that they need to play at the present moment. Soak up some of the violence, some of what's happening to them at the present moment, and then potentially either overreacting, and they've got abilities to do that, say with a dirty bomb, or to knuckle down, to concede ground, and to give Donald Trump essentially the kind of deal that he criticised with Obama and then Biden on, but would be trademarked by him with them giving up their nuclear ambition.
Isn't the problem with that is that Israel has already now gone so far, assassinating top officials and scientists and so forth, talking about regime change and the bombing campaign they've engaged in, that they can't be sure that whatever happens, Iran won't quietly try and accumulate enough material for a nuclear bomb and hit them one day in due course. In other words, it's already past the point, from Israel's point of view, of no return.
No, I don't think it has. It's never really past the point of no return. They know that they can't take that final step to eliminate forcibly and maybe violently the Iranian nuclear capability, and therefore they've got to listen very carefully to what President Trump is saying. And although up to now President Trump has gone along with supporting them along the line, we also know that he's got apprehensions about getting America dragged into another Middle Eastern war. And
when you say they can't go to that final moment and eliminate the nuclear threat, is that simply because it's buried under a mountain and they can't get at it?
Well, it is, and it would require something very considerable to do it. And if you start blowing up nuclear facilities, there are wider repercussions to
contamination is possible,
I think. And in terms of this particular chess play out that is going on, we forget that there are other players in this game. The Russians and the Chinese are also players in the Middle East. At the moment, they're standing back, despite the fact that they are in alliance with the Iranians. But there's nothing to say that in the future they might not get involved.
Let's ask a little bit more about that, because there hasn't been perhaps enough talk about the allies. So Xi Jinping has said, I think in the last few hours, that he's very, very worried about the situation. And again, he's using this word de-escalation, which neither Donald Trump nor Tehran seems to be very keen on at the moment. But then there's the Russians. They are an absolutely key ally. Iran has been supplying Russia with huge numbers of these suicide drones for the war in Ukraine. Why do you think that Putin has been so silent, relatively speaking, up to now?
I think because he's weak and because he's distracted by what's happening in Ukraine. His power and his influence have severely been diminished over time. He thought he was going to take Ukraine in 3 days, and now 3.5 years later he's making tiny movements there. NATO has enlarged during that time, and he's lost a lot of credibility and a lot of face and a lot of people. A million casualties.
It's astonishing. It's a huge number.
So I think at the moment he's got bigger preoccupations than coming to the aid of a regime that he doesn't actually like anyway.
And of course, the West itself is divided. We talked about America, but here at home, we've had the Cobra meeting, and they, I assume, will have been discussing things like what to do if the Americans ask for permission to use Diego Garcia as the base for a bombing attack on the nuclear facility. Because as I understand it, the stealth bomber that carries this extraordinary bunker-busting bomb would be based in Diego Garcia. And I think I'm right in saying that we would have to say yes.
Well, I don't know about that, and I wouldn't speculate about that, because these are operational issues that would come up depending on what America made a final decision on doing. So I think that's in the realms of speculation at the moment.
Okay, well, let's turn to the politics, and if I can ask you to take your military expert hat on and put the political one back on, because this is a very, very difficult series of decisions for Keir Starmer, depending on what he's asked to do, because there will be a very strong instinct, I think, through quite a lot of the Labour government and the Labour Party, that in the end, whatever's happened in Gaza, we have to support Israel. It's been a long-standing alliance, and if there is an existential threat to Israel, then we have, of course, to be standing beside them. And if that means helping them with missiles or anything else, that's what we have to do. But on the other hand, of course, as you know, there's the very, very strong Gaza-related hostility to Israel. Lots of people in the Labour family who now regard Israel as a kind of pariah state. So just talk us through the politics of this from the Prime Minister's point of view.
Well, the politics are complicated, and I think Keir Starmer will do what he thinks is right. Up to now, he's basically ignored some of the tensions and some of the sort of unasked for advice that he's had from various elements in the party, and he's got a considerable brain. He's managed Donald Trump in a way that most other leaders didn't manage to do. He's been able to sort of dominate a lot of the international crises that are going on just now. So I think he's not going to be affected by the short term. But there are tensions.
Fair to say that he is instinctively pro-Israel.
He is, as one would be, because that's the only democracy in the region. And the Iranians have a declared policy of eliminating Israel from the face of the earth. So in these circumstances, there are good guys and there are bad guys. And Israel, whatever its problems at the moment, and whatever reservations people have, and lots of them do, even friends of Israel have these reservations, the fact is that it is a country that is beleaguered and threatened.
Do you share the worries of people in the Labour Party about us getting involved? In other words, not just the moral questions about the way Israel has behaved in Gaza, but also the prospect of us being a declared foe of the Iranians, given how many of their sort of sleeper cells and so forth are around the West, and the kinds of things that they might do to us if we were part of the alliance against them.
The Iranians already think we are the enemy. I don't think this is going to make it any worse or any better than it was before. But the fact is that they're actually quite weak. Not only weak in terms of what the damage that has been done to them by the Israelis this time round, and that is quite remarkable. This is quite devastating, the effect that it's had. But up to now, it is also weak. It's weak internally, deeply, deeply divided, with a population that does not approve, and who will, at the moment, maybe rallying round the flag, but will only do it for a very short period of time, and know that this has been visited on them by the mullahs.
And yet, an awful lot of this is quite like what happened before the Iraq War. And that went very, very badly wrong in terms of what happened afterwards, the civil war, the division of Iraq. And, Iran is also a very divided country in terms of its ethnic groups and so forth. We can't be sure what would happen in Iran if the mullahs fell.
Well, that's why Keir and others are not talking about regime change, although I think there's a lot of concern about the way in which the mullahs have directed their attention over the years. I mean,
it's quite tantalising, isn't it, the way, Lord Robertson? Because on the one hand, nobody wants a full-scale war. Everybody's worried about what the Americans might or might not do. On the other hand, removing the nuclear threat from the Middle East that Iran has posed, and possibly having a more democratic, more acceptable regime there is a huge prize.
Well, we'd all like to see the nuclear threat eliminated, and President Biden and President Obama actually came to an agreement torn up by Donald Trump. Now, he seems now to be interested in achieving it in a different sort of way, and maybe then qualifying for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think we can all go along with that ambition, because a nuclear-armed Iran in the Middle East is not just a danger to its neighbours and to Israel, it's a danger to the rest of the world.
Lord Robertson, thank you very much indeed for coming in.